People generally don't like doing hard things for no reason, so if your game is hard, your progression systems and positive feedback need to be good. Some people, such as myself, enjoy playing games on their harder difficulties because you would think that the harder the game, the more rewarding it would be for every boss you beat, quest you finish, and whatever. But unfortunately, this is not always the case. Different genres will obviously have vastly different mechanics from one another, and because of that, they'll have vastly different ways of adding extra challenge. In platformers, for example, it's not like you can just lower the player's jump height or running speed, because that would obviously just make plenty of jumps completely impossible. So what platformers have to do for players who want different difficulties generally involves making some levels or entire sections of the game vary greatly in difficulty, which gets even more complicated because then you need to decide which of those levels are mandatory to beat the game. It's the same thing with puzzle games. The only way to add difficulty is to add optional harder levels for players seeking a challenge. But generally speaking, for pretty much every other genre of games, there are enemies which have health. And this is where things get rough. To pick on a specific example, Nier Replicant. I like this game, but I did not enjoy playing it most of the time because I played on hard mode, which gives enemies 300% health, making every combat encounter feel like I'm filing out of prison bars with a toothbrush. So I've now had to resort to gaslighting myself into liking the game because I honestly really do like the game. I like the characters, I really like the visuals, I like the narrative. I don't really like hack and slash combat, but with the cool spells adding an actual strategic choice you can make depending on what enemies you're fighting, I really wouldn't mind if the enemies didn't have triple health. Now obviously tripling enemy health for going up one difficulty setting is a stupid idea, but giving every enemy at least a little extra health, maybe like 50% more, doesn't really sound like a bad thing at first. Until you think about it for like 10 seconds and realize that it doesn't actually make the game harder, it just makes it take longer. So let's look at some other stats that we can just easily change and see what happens when we do that. Lowering player health just means that the player has to be more careful. Lowering player damage is exactly the same as increasing enemy health, and increasing enemy damage is the same thing as decreasing player health. We can change item drop rate, buffs, debuffs, armor, reload time, ammo, enemy sight range, hunger depletion, shop costs, experience gain, an infinite amount of things, and this is what most games do. They just pick a couple stats and either crank them up or crank them down, because that's easy, and yes, generally speaking, makes the game harder. But most of the time, it doesn't make the victory as much more rewarding as it should. Another important thing to bring up in this topic is Souls-like games. Souls-like games are, generally speaking, very, very carefully and well balanced. Obviously, there will be a million people saying this weapon is overpowered or broken, or this weapon is trash or less than worthless, or doesn't fucking make me a bowl of mac and cheese every time I use it or something. But aside from those instances, these games are extremely carefully and well balanced. And they have to be, right? Because they just would not work if they weren't. Like, that's the whole point of the Souls-like genre, it's what you expect. There aren't any difficulty settings, so the game has to be difficult by default. And it has to be possible to go elsewhere, get stronger, and come back when you're more prepared, but that shouldn't have to happen at every boss. The game should give you enough chances to prepare yourself and level up so that every fight is at least fair, and again, for the most part, these games succeed in that. And for the most part is all I need from it, because balancing this kind of game is really hard, so it's fine if some weapons are, let's be honest, marginally more or less powerful than others. If you think a weapon makes the game too easy, use a different weapon. There's your difficulty settings. Going back to difficulty settings, the actual topic of this video, the good approach, which I wish more games did, is to actually change mechanics and behavior which are specific to the game. Ultra Kill has a ton of very specific enemy changes on higher difficulties. For example, the basic melee enemies get a new attack, the basic ranged enemies predict your movement, drone enemies fly faster and are more aggressive, and there's tons of changes to boss behavior and attacks, and way more. And these are just the changes going from the second hardest difficulty up to the hardest difficulty. Going down, there's way more, which brings up another side of this, the fact that easier difficulties also still have to have effort put into them to be fun, and it can really be done in similar ways as harder difficulties. I know there has to be other games that have actually interesting difficulty settings, but Ultra Kill is the only one I can think of right now, so let me know of any other cool ones you know of in the comments. One last thing to mention here is something that, of course, completely invalidates the first sentence of this video. People generally don't like doing hard things for no reason. Which is challenge runs. If there's something someone can do to make a game significantly harder and it sounds good in a YouTube video, someone will do it. This kind of goes back to the first real video I made about a year and a half ago about tech in video games, in the sense that this really isn't something that the developer can plan for. Obviously, the devs will know that if a player decides to completely disregard a core mechanic of their game, it'll make it a lot harder, but it doesn't really make sense to commit resources to developing around challenge runs unless some kind of challenge mode is a feature that's already planned. For example, if someone was to, say, try and beat Elden Ring without rolling, there's a lot of ways to do that, and it's very possible, but if the developers were to try and support that more, all it would do is make the challenge easier and less rewarding. Even if they try to make it more rewarding by just adding an achievement for doing it, that might make it less rewarding because now there would be more people trying to do it, and the people who can't do it would just never be able to get that achievement anyways, making it even worse. So, like I said, unless the challenge mode is built directly into the game with intent, the player base should really be the ones handling challenge runs. So that's all I have for this video. Thank you for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.